Camping in the Blue Ridge Mountains can be weird. Every time the fire died, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring. This personal account comes from Ian Lineberry's Substack. The story I'm sitting down to tell is a true one experienced by a faithful friend of mine, Sam and I. I'm often reluctant to tell this story at length to most people, as the subject matter is unexplainable and rather strange. I don't want to be viewed as the superstitious nut. But having guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the United States, I feel I have the authority to tell this story. Essentially what I'm saying is I've been around in the deep dark hollows all across North America and never experienced something so strange as I did that night. I don't fancify my experiences in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine there's something more to a twig breaking. As anyone who has spent a good deal of time in the woods knows, there's no reason to. Eventually, you'll experience something daring or fantastic. I am a hunter first and foremost, and to a hunter there's always an explanation, a reason to the wilderness and her inhabitants. It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make a successful hunt. As a hunter, you're a sort of woodsman detective, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. Let's just say this tale is a cold case. Let's get into it. It was early summer and I was itching to go camping. I had recently received a new tent and was eager to use it. I called up my good buddy Sam and we planned out our camping adventure. We considered going up to the Grayson Highlands or even south into North Carolina. After debating it, we decided it would be more fun to camp somewhere we wouldn't run into any other people. Deep in the woods, far from anyone else, where we could bushcraft, hoot and holler, and bring a gun without fear of scaring the yuppies camping next to us. Amen to that. While we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the most remote stretch of woods between us. So we loaded up our stuff and began hiking, deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flat land, a floodplain area and creek. The small creek that ran gave the area a beautiful ambiance. Early signs of summer were visible all around, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose into the west for miles. In front of us was the creek, and to the left the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and north. Off to the right, further down the valley, more splits in the ridges are made by little tributaries. We started camp by clearing the brush and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth. Remember this point. The tarp? It extended only roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that he planned to sleep in. I've only ever camped in a hammock once and it didn't go great, but I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. We gathered a hefty load of firewood consisting of some reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. I've spoken about the joy of being out there on this blog before, so I won't beat a dead horse, but it was really nice to be away from people. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the shit until the sun went down. Now, one of the things Sam and I have always bonded on has been Bigfoot shows. We're both skeptics, and I would say we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject matter to be nostalgic, silly, and kinda just a fun thing to joke about. So I brought up the idea to Sam that we begin to, quote, hunt Bigfoot. He laughed and thought it was a great idea. So we began doing the antics they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We started with the classic tree knocks. A tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes through the forest. Supposedly, Sasquatch communicate this way. We didn't think anything of it at all, as I said before, we didn't really believe. We were just joking around. So we began by knocking on the trees and then stopping and listening for a response. After a few times of doing this, we paused, and hearing nothing, I began to think of a joke to crack and something else to do. Before I could even open my mouth, we heard clear as day a tree knock far off somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam, wide-eyed, just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks and we listened again. Then off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right, we began hearing knocks. Sam at this point was literally getting to be a little freaked out and was perplexed as to what this could actually be. I, at the time, was such a hard skeptic and insisted that it was a woodpecker or a person. But who in the world would be out there, deeper in the woods than we are, on private land? What woodpecker makes 3 loud booming knocks on the tree that sounds exactly like the knocks we made? These were all Sam's points. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot. I then insisted that we push the envelope by doing whoops and howls just like they do on TV. Sam was not very enthused by this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of us that night, knowing sometimes there's certain things you don't mess with. But at that time, I was full of piss and vinegar and stubborn as a mule about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I also had brought a gun with me and was certain I could fight off anything we would need to fight off. So we started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon, and beyond the firelight you couldn't see a dang thing. We would howl and wait, listening for a reply. After a few howls, the excitement of, "What was that?" started to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of the woodpecker began to appear true. Then, out of the dark distance came one of the strangest sounds to this day I've ever heard. Not a canine howl, not an owl's hoot, but a flippin' ape howl. Sam's eyes were as big as backhoe tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason that one. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness. I just laughed and threw out another howl. Off to the left ridge, it replied to us again. The clearest ape whoop I've ever heard. It's as if it were recorded by researchers in the Congo, I'm telling you. I looked at Sam, myself feeling more curious and excited than anything else. I reiterated, "Dude." Then something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More whoops and howls began on the ridge to the right and further down the valley. And they weren't random, they had etiquette. As if they were chatting back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl, the one to the right would whoop and howl, the first one would respond, and then the one way down the valley would chime in. Sam was really freaked out now and began considering if we should leave. I, being a stubborn idiot, claimed it was just owls. "Don't sweat it, it's just owls." "Owls?" Sam said. "We were both raised in these hollers. I've heard owls. You're going to tell me that was an owl? Have you ever in your life heard an owl that sounded like a frickin' ape?" "Well, no, but there's no way Bigfoot is real. It has to be a bunch of owls just speaking to each other or something. There's nothing else it could be." I was half laughing in astonishment and disbelief of what was unfolding that moment. Sam begged and I relented, and we bickered over it for a minute, but we decided together that the wisest decision was to stop antagonizing whatever it was in the woods miles around us whooping and knocking. It wasn't too long after that we decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going, and every time the fire died down, the woods came to life. We left the fire going, and every time the fire died down, the woods notified us. It came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring. All around camp, we could hear what sounded like things being thrown and footsteps. From time to time, we would hear another knock or another howl coming from a new position. Sam would leap out of his hammock and chuck loads of wood onto the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then lay back down and try to rush back to sleep. He repeated this whole process like 5 times. Each time the fire died, things got spookier and spookier. A few times Sam would say, "Did you hear that?" And every time I would just blame it on possums nearing camp or something, hoping to find food scraps. Well, Sam eventually ran out of firewood, meaning that this time when the fire died, it died for good, leaving us to the dark void of the Appalachian Holler. I vividly remember I had fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp, I began to wake up. I was slowly waking up, thinking I was having some sort of nightmare, when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was reality that was full of frightening sounds and things that go bump in the night. That's what was scaring me. The woods around us had become loud with unexplainable movement, the movement of multiple large things. The whooping and knocking had stopped, which did not comfort me for some reason, and I think it's because all the new sounds were now right outside my door. We determined that there was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around camp that the sounds did not cross. Then suddenly out of nowhere, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and branches. It was something large running full sprint through the woods, starting maybe 50 yards away and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves turned to crinkling tarp. The creature was standing on the tarp my tent was situated on. I was frozen, like a child, frozen in fear, eyes wide open. My heart was pounding out of my chest so hard I thought it would explode. Not 4 feet up, but high above my tent, the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It was the sound of a huff and blow. Exactly the way you hear a gorilla do it on TV. Or even how the apes in Planet of the Apes do it. Pick one. 3 forceful huff and blows. Then the creature turned around and ran back the way it came. Back into the darkness of the night. Sam practically leaped out of his hammock and said, "Oh, let me guess, you didn't hear that either, did you?" I replied with, "Yeah, let's get the fuck out of here." I slid around into the chamber of my 30-30 and crawled out of the tent. We both got busy grabbing only our essentials and started out of the woods. Using crappy dim flashlights, we made our way up the hill, frantically looking behind us into the terrible night and trying to move fast without running. We hiked a long ways, and by the time we made it back to the house, it was far past midnight, and I have never felt so relieved. We never did see what it was that charged us, and we never did hear anything else after that. But whatever it was, it scared us enough to make us hide out in the dead of the night and leave all of our gear there. We returned the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish we had surveyed the area for tracks or some clues as to what it was, but at the time, we did not want to be down there for any longer than we had to. Having been some years since this happened, I would go down there in a heartbeat and not think a thing of it. When I come home, I usually feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off of my shoulders, knowing that there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about. I'm just alone in the woods. What is funny, though, is despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always returns. I know it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of woods specifically, because I feel it in most places in Appalachia. And a feeling of dread. And it amplifies every time you hear some strange crashing in the woods or a sound you cannot explain. Most of the times I've experienced this, I've had a gun. And I think to myself, I basically pump myself up saying, "Come on, man, you're the biggest, baddest thing out here." And while that works for a minute, I can never fully shake that anxiety. My brother, without having ever heard this story, reluctantly asked me over the phone one day, quote, "Don't think I'm crazy, but have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house? I don't know what it is, but every time I go down there, I feel like I'm being watched and I get filled with dread." Hearing him say that sent shivers down my back, simply because I always dismiss this feeling. I've swept the story under the rug for years, telling myself it was just a bear, etc. I don't even know. To hear my brother, who is a Marine, tell me that, certified to me that I was not simply just being a wuss. Now, some of you may hear this and think that I am a nutjob Bigfoot believer. I've been reluctant to share this story for that reason. But I want to end this saying, I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. We never did lay our eyes on anything. And frankly, I have no worldly explanation for it. Those were the events that transpired that night. And I'll let you make of that what you will. In the late 1970s, two brothers, Mike and Len, set out for a fishing and camping trip in a remote Utah canyon that would later earn the name Sasquatch Canyon. They had visited this area many times with family. But this trip felt different from the moment they arrived. As soon as they entered the canyon, they noticed a chilling silence. No deer, no birds, not even the buzz of insects, zip zilch nada. Both brothers felt uneasy, as though something unseen was watching them. While digging in the willows for fishing worms, Mike still couldn't shake this sensation on the back of his neck. He tried to shrug it off, and the brothers tried to just settle into camp. As night fell, they lit a lantern and built a small fire near their truck. Sitting on a log, they were both trying to relax. They described it as feeling awkward, like when you have to have small talk with someone. The feeling of being watched was the elephant in the room. They did their best until Mike noticed Lynn had gone unusually quiet. His brother's beer sat unopened in his hand as he stared fixedly toward the road. When Mike followed his brother's gaze, his stomach dropped. Just beyond the firelight, something massive was moving silently between clumps of willows. It shifted branches aside and leaned out, peering at them. For several seconds, the brothers locked eyes with what appeared to be a Sasquatch. Its face dark, hair covered, and partially hidden by shadows. And while it looked human, it was clearly not human. The creature's eyes were reflecting off of the firelight, and then he disappeared, only to pop back up about 30 or 40 feet away. The shock of the sight made Mike lose his balance and tumble from the log. By the time he scrambled up, the figure had vanished into the willows, crashing noisily as he moved up the canyon hillside. The encounter lasted barely 2 minutes, but it was enough to convince Mike they needed to leave immediately. His younger brother wanted to stay in the camper shell, but Mike insisted they pack up and go. They never camped there again. Mike later reported the incident to a ranger, who told him he wasn't alone. Other bow hunters and locals had also described strange encounters in that canyon. Over time, stories spread, and the area became known as Sasquatch Canyon. In 2021, a man made the reckless decision to spend the night inside a remote cave in the Australian wilderness. It wasn't just a random camping trip. He went there on a dare after a friend shared a disturbing story about that same cave. What he experienced inside is something he would never forget. It took him almost 4 hours of hiking to even reach the entrance. By the time he arrived, the place already carried an unsettling air. To get inside, he had to climb down a man-made ladder anchored with a heavy chain that rattled as he descended. Once below, he explored the cave's winding passages, crawling through narrow holes and ducking under jagged rock. At first, the only sounds were the scrape of his boots and the faint echo of dripping water. It was still and cold, the kind of silence that made every small noise stand out. But as the night went on, that silence was broken in ways he couldn't explain. Not long after settling in, he began hearing rocks falling near the entrance. At first, it sounded like small pebbles, but then came the distant sound of something moving, heavy enough that it couldn't be written off as just loose gravel shifting on its own. Later, around 11 p.m., while trying to calm his nerves with a quick dinner, he heard something that froze him in place. The chain on the ladder began to move. This wasn't a faint clink or a soft sway. It was the loud rattle of iron links shifting, as if something unseen was tugging on them. He knew the weight of that chain, knew it couldn't be moved by wind, and besides, there was no draft inside the cave. His whole body broke out in goosebumps as he whispered to himself that he was being watched. Time dragged on. He strapped on his backpack in case he needed to bolt, and for hours he sat there listening to the cave breathe around him. Then, sometime past midnight, the sounds came again. This time, it wasn't rocks or chains. It was hissing. At first, it sounded like the kind of hiss an animal might make, but it carried on too long, broken into strange patterns. He realized with growing dread that it almost resembled voices. Not clear words, but something close. Like whispers, but from another language. His flashlight swept across every corner of stone, every crack and shadow. Nothing. The hissing continued, and the longer he listened, the more he became certain that whatever was making it was close. Much closer than he wanted it to be. The most logical danger wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was the possibility of another person being in that cave. Maybe a squatter, maybe someone unhinged, someone who had chosen that desolate hole in the earth to call home. If that were the case, stumbling into their territory in the middle of the night could have ended very badly. But that explanation doesn't answer everything. Why the strange, drawn-out hissing that sounded almost human? Why no signs of anyone once he searched the entire cave? Eventually, the noises faded. He stayed close to the entrance, counting the hours until dawn. When the first hint of light touched the sky, he wasted no time climbing out, pulling himself up the iron ladder, one rung at a time until he was back in the open air. He never returned to that cave again. To this day, he swears something was down there with him, whether it was a person hiding in the dark or something that can't be explained. It leaves one final question. If you were dared to spend a night alone in a cave like that, would you take the risk? I used to live in this house just off campus in a small college town in Oregon. Won't name it, but it's one of those places where everything's green and damp year-round and the houses all seem older than they should be. The kind of town where everything creaks, so you stop noticing what creaks, at least until you don't. A couple I know owns the place. Good people. They rent out the upstairs to students, usually cheap since it's just one bedroom and a weird half-landing stairwell. I rented it from them a while back when I was finishing school, but now I just live a few blocks down. We stayed friendly, and when they go out of town, I house sit, feed the pets, bring in the mail, make sure the place doesn't get robbed. I'd stayed there a bunch of times. I lived in the upstairs for over a year. Nothing weird back then, at least nothing I paid attention to, but something was definitely off this last time. I don't know how else to say it except that whatever it was didn't seem to care about me being there until I stayed the night. The first night was uneventful. I cooked dinner like I always do. Same old pan, same old weird clicking noise the oven makes when it gets too hot. I had a show on in the background and was just zoning out. I was stirring pasta when I heard this crash from the stairs leading up to the tenant's room. Like heavy, loud, like a storage bin full of books or tools. Tumbled end over end down wooden steps. I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. Just total dead silence afterward. Now here's the thing. The stairwell is closed off by a door at the bottom. Always has been. I figured the tenant must be home and maybe dropped something. But no footsteps, no swearing, no noise at all. I called up and asked if everything was okay, and waited. Nothing. I banged on the door, then opened the door and went up. The stairwell was empty. No books, no bin, no mess. Nothing looked out of place. I checked the top bedroom. It was cleaner than I'd ever seen it. Sheets tucked, desk clear, everything sitting just so. And it smelled empty. You know what I mean? That dry, unused air smell? Maybe I'm just weird. I went back to my dinner and tried to forget it. But the weird thing is, I couldn't stop feeling like the stairs had been walked on. I don't know why that stuck with me, or if that will even make sense to anyone else. The second night is when everything tipped over into wrong. It was around 8 p.m. I was winding down, doing some emails in bed in the guest room. There's a light switch in there that's on a dimmer slider. Old school, kinda stiff, and a sliding door that covers the bedroom entry. Not relevant yet, just details. Anyway, I start hearing these slow footsteps above me. Heel to toe. Deliberate. Not pacing exactly, more like a pattern. Like someone walking a figure 8 back and forth over the same boards. There's a very distinct creak up there too, near the closet, and that spot was creaking. I assumed the tenant came home, so I shot her a message. Hey, just letting you know I'm downstairs. Let me know if I'm being too loud or anything. She didn't reply right away, so I kept doing what I was doing. An hour later, she texted me back. She's still out of town. Has been for days. Won't be back until next week. I just stared at the screen for a second. Then I heard the footsteps again. Same pace, same path. And right then, the dimmer switch beside my bed, it slid down on its own. The light didn't just flicker, from full brightness to nothing, like someone was pressing it down inch by inch. Before I could even react, the sliding bedroom door slammed against its track. I mean slammed, not closed. It banged so hard like someone on the other side had punched it with a flat palm, and then it started to sway. That door's heavy, metal rail, it shouldn't sway unless someone has hit it. I was scared, but I got up, yanked it open, and was preparing for a fight. Nothing, not even a breath of air. Just stillness. but everything in my chest was screaming that something had been standing right there, behind that door, watching me as the light dimmed. I grabbed my bag and left that night. I still came back every day to feed the cat, water the plants, do the responsible thing, but I wouldn't sleep there again. Not after that, no way. Here's a part that keeps digging at me. You know, when I lived upstairs, I always thought the attic door was kind of strange. It's one of those square panel ones that folds down. Every few nights it would be open a crack in the morning, even if I knew I hadn't touched it. I just figured it was an old house thing, humidity, air pressure. You know, you hear noises, things settle. But now, after this debacle, I'm not sure anymore. Was whatever that was always up there? Did it just never care I was there before? Or did it wait until I came back in a different role? I never felt threatened while I lived there. But now I wonder if that thing knew I wasn't just a tenant anymore. But maybe the house was watching me too. I don't even need anyone to believe me. I just wanted to get it out.